The CEO's harsh words cut him deep. Then suddenly the room asked, "Is there any fighter pilot here?" He walked into that conference room carrying nothing but a cheap pen and a name badge that nobody bothered to read. No fancy title, no designer suit. Just a quiet man in his mid-40s who sat down near the back, poured himself a glass of water, and waited for the meeting to begin. The room was full of people who wanted to be noticed. You could feel it the moment you walked in. The way everyone stood just a little straighter, laughed just a little louder, made sure the right people saw them talking to other right people. This was one of those rooms. A quarterly leadership summit for a big consulting firm. The kind of gathering where titles mattered more than talent and confidence was worn like a uniform. He did not belong to that world. He knew it. They knew it. And within 20 minutes of the meeting starting, the CEO made sure everyone in the room knew it too. The CEO, let's call him the kind of man who had been powerful for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be wrong, scanned the room while making his opening remarks. His eyes landed on this quiet man near the back, sitting alone with his glass of water, and something in the CEO sparked. Maybe it was the plain suit. Maybe it was the stillness that felt out of place in a room full of performance. Whatever it was, the CEO paused mid-sentence, smiled the way people smile when they think they're being clever, and said, "Did someone invite the maintenance crew?" The room laughed. Not everyone, but enough. The polite, uncomfortable kind of laugh that people produce when the most powerful person in the room makes a joke at someone else's expense, and they don't know what else to do. The quiet man near the back did not react. He did not redden. He did not look down. He did not smile tightly the way people do when they're pretending something didn't sting. He just sat there, hands folded on the table, eyes calm, and waited for the meeting to continue. Those who were sitting close to him later said, his stillness felt almost strange, like watching someone hold their breath underwater without any sign of struggle. What the CEO didn't know, what almost nobody in that room knew, was who this man actually was. He had spent 19 years flying fighter jets for the Air Force, F-16s specifically. He had flown over 200 combat missions. He had, on one particular night over hostile territory, kept a crippled aircraft in the air long enough to bring it home after losing most of his hydraulic systems, a situation that most pilots don't survive. He had spent years after that training younger pilots, teaching them how to think under pressure, how to make decisions when the wrong decision costs you everything. He had left the military quietly, the way good soldiers often do, and taken a job in aerospace logistics consulting, because it kept him close to the world he knew. He was not there to impress anyone. He was there to do work. And in this room full of titles and performances, he was invisible. For a while, that invisibility didn't matter. The meeting went the way these meetings usually go. Presentations, projections, a lot of confident language about strategies and synergies and growth targets. The quiet man took notes. Nobody asked his opinion. Nobody needed to. He was not the kind of person this meeting was designed for. Then, about 2 hours in, everything changed. The chief strategy officer stood up, and the energy in the room shifted immediately. She had the look of someone delivering news they had been dreading all week. She started talking about a defense contractor, one of the firm's biggest clients, that was facing a serious crisis. Their next-generation aircraft simulation program was producing consistent pilot errors during testing. Not small errors. The kind of errors that, in a real aircraft, would mean fatalities. The client had brought in their own engineers. They had reviewed the software. They had changed the instructors. Nothing was working. The pilots kept freezing at exactly the wrong moments, making the wrong calls, unable to process what the simulator was throwing at them. The client was scared. The contract, worth tens of millions over several years, was in serious danger of being pulled. The room erupted. Everyone had an idea. The investment bankers in the group wanted to restructure the contract language to limit liability. The marketing people suggested bringing in a PR firm to manage the optics. Someone recommended hiring an external aviation consulting group, which would take 6 to 8 months and cost a fortune. The CEO leaned back in his chair and nodded along, which everyone in the room interpreted as wisdom. Voices layered over each other. Laptops opened. People began typing proposals they hadn't fully thought through yet. Nobody in that room had ever sat inside a cockpit. Nobody had ever felt what it means to have 6 different warning systems screaming in your ears simultaneously, while your hands are trying to do 4 things at once, and your brain is trying to decide which of those things is the most important. Nobody there knew anything about what was actually happening to those pilots. Except one person. The chief strategy officer, running out of ideas and running out of patience, looked around the room with tired eyes and said something almost offhand, more to herself than to anyone else. "Is there any fighter pilot here?" 3 seconds of silence. Then the quiet man near the back raised his hand. Not dramatically, not with any kind of satisfaction on his face. He raised it the way you raise your hand when someone calls your name at a doctor's office. Simple, calm, without needing to make anything of it. The whole room turned to look at him, including the CEO, who 2 hours earlier had made a joke about the maintenance crew. The chief strategy officer blinked. "You're a fighter pilot?" "Was," he said. 19 years, F-16s, 212 combat missions. A different kind of silence filled the room. The kind that means something has just shifted, and everyone feels it, but nobody has words for it yet. He stood up, walked to the whiteboard, and picked up a marker. What happened over the next 30 minutes was one of those things that people who were there would keep talking about for years. Not because it was theatrical. Actually, it was the opposite of theatrical. It was precise. It was quiet. It was the kind of thing you only see when someone truly knows what they're talking about. He explained, in plain language, exactly what was happening to those pilots in the simulator. There is a well-documented phenomenon in aviation called task saturation. The moment when a pilot's brain is receiving more information than it can process in real time. When that happens in the right sequence, something breaks down. Not the aircraft, the human. The brain starts dropping inputs. It starts prioritizing the wrong things. It freezes on the loudest alert instead of the most critical one. It is not a failure of skill. It is a failure of system design. Specifically, the way the simulator was sequencing its alerts was creating a cascade that no amount of pilot training could overcome, because the cascade itself was unnatural. Real aircraft don't behave that way. The simulator was essentially training pilots to fail by giving them problems in an order that no real emergency would ever produce. He had seen this before, not in simulators, in real emergencies, in real aircraft, with real consequences. He had watched it happen to other pilots, and he had felt the early edges of it himself. He knew what it looked like from the inside. He put down the marker. Then he outlined a solution. 3 steps. Redesign the alert sequencing to match real-world failure patterns. Build a graduated escalation system so pilots encounter stress in increasing layers instead of all at once. Add a physiological monitoring component to the training protocol so instructors can see in real time when a pilot is approaching saturation and pull back before bad habits form. He said he knew the right people to bring in. He said he could make the calls that afternoon. He estimated 8 weeks, not 8 months. He said the client's pilots weren't failing because they weren't good enough. They were failing because the system they were being trained in was broken. He sat back down. The room was completely quiet. The CEO, who had not been genuinely quiet in a meeting for longer than he could probably remember, said nothing. His pen, which he normally tapped against the table constantly, a nervous habit everyone around him had learned to ignore, sat completely still. The chief strategy officer looked at this quiet man with the cheap pen and the unread name badge, and she said, "Can you lead this?" He said yes. The client did not walk. The plan was adopted. 8 weeks later, the simulation program passed its certification review. The errors stopped. The pilots started performing the way they were supposed to perform. The contract was not only saved, it was extended by 3 years. There were promotions. There were emails from people at the top of the company who had never bothered to learn this man's name before. There were handwritten notes and meeting invitations and all the things that organizations do when they suddenly realize they have undervalued someone. He accepted all of it with the same quiet he had brought into that room on the first day. What happened between him and the CEO? That conversation. The one that took place in private after the summit, with no witnesses. Nobody knows for certain. The quiet man never talked about it. But people who knew the CEO well noticed something different in him after that day. He was slower to make jokes. He paused a little longer before he spoke in meetings. He asked more questions, whether that change came from guilt or from genuine respect, or from simply watching what competence looks like when it has nothing to prove. Nobody can say for sure. What people do say, the ones who were in that room, is this. The CEO's joke landed in a room full of people who laughed because they didn't know better. But the joke could only land the way it did, because everyone in that room was doing the same thing the CEO was doing, judging by what they could see, assuming that a quiet man with a plain suit and an unimpressive badge had nothing to offer. And the lesson, if there is one, isn't complicated. The most capable person in the room is very rarely the loudest one. The person who has actually been through something, who has made life and death decisions in real time, who has felt real fear and kept going anyway. That person doesn't usually walk into a room announcing it. They don't need to. They already know what they know. They've already been tested. The only thing left to do is wait for the moment that actually needs them. And when that moment comes, they raise their hand. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, just quietly, completely, like someone who has been ready the whole time, because they have been. That is the part the CEO never saw coming. He looked at a quiet man and saw someone beneath his notice. He looked at stillness and read it as emptiness. But stillness, in people who have really lived something, is rarely emptiness. It is almost always the opposite. It is everything they have learned, in compressed and contained, waiting patiently for when it is actually needed. There's a reason military training produces people like this. It is not an accident that veterans carry themselves differently. It's not a mystery either. It's the result of years of being told, what you feel right now does not matter as much as what you do. The mission matters. The task in front of you matters. Your ego, your pride, your need to be seen and validated, those things have to wait. Sometimes, they have to wait a very long time. That training doesn't disappear when the uniform comes off. It lives in the body. It lives in the way a man sits in a room full of noise and simply waits. It lives in the way he raises his hand without needing the moment to be more than it is. The CEO built his confidence over 20 years of being the smartest person in every room he walked into. The quiet man built his over 19 years of being tested in ways most people will never have to face. One kind of confidence sits in the chair at the head of the table. The other kind sits quietly near the exit, pours a glass of water, and waits for when it matters. On that day, in that room, everyone found out which kind is real.